Page 144, Chapter 4, The Bluecaps. Throughout the grinding of our souls, in the gears of the great nighttime institution, when our souls are pulverized, and our flesh hangs down in tatters like a beggar's rags, we suffer too much and are too immersed in our own pain to rivet with penetrating and far-seeing gaze those pale night executioners who torture us. A surfeit of inner grief floods our eyes. Otherwise, what historians of our torturers we would be, for it is certain they will never ever describe themselves as they actually are. But alas, every former prisoner remembers his own interrogation in detail, how they squeezed him, and what foulness they squeezed out of him. But often he does not even remember their names, let alone think of them as human beings. So it is with me that I can recall of my cellmates, one of my cellmates that I can, captain of state security, Yazapov, with whom I spent no little time face to face, two of us alone in his office. There is one thing, however, which remains with all of us, as an accurate generalized recollection. Foul rot, a space totally infected with putrefaction, and when, decades later, we are long past fits of anger or outrage in our own quieted hearts, we retain this first impression of low, malicious, impious, and possibly muddled people. There is an interesting story about Alexander II, the Tsar, surrounded by revolutionaries who were to make 7 attempts on his life. He once visited the house of preliminary detention on Ch.4, the uncle of the big house, where he ordered them to lock him up in solitary confinement cell number 227. He stayed in it for more than an hour, attempting thereby to sense the state of mind of those he had imprisoned there. One cannot but admit that for a monarch, this was evidence of moral aspiration, to feel the need and make the effort to take a spiritual view of the matter. But it is impossible to picture any of our interrogators right up to Abu Kamal and Beria wanting to slip into a prisoner's skin even for 1 hour, or feeling compelled to sit and meditate in solitary confinement. Their branch of service does not require them to be educated people with broad culture and broad views, and they are not. Their branch of service does not require them to think logically. They do not. Their branch of service requires only that they carry out orders exactly and be impervious to suffering. And that is what they do and what they are. We who have passed through their hands feel suffocated when we think of that legion, which is stripped bare of universal human ideals. Although others might not be aware of it, it was clear to the interrogators at least that the cases were fabricated. Except at staff conferences, they could not seriously say to one another or to themselves that they were exposing criminals. Nonetheless, they kept right on producing depositions page after page to make sure that we rotted. So the essence of it all turns out to be the credo of the Blatnia, the underworld of Russian thieves. Quote, you today, me tomorrow. Quote. They understood that the cases were fabricated, yet they kept on working year after year. How could they? Either they forced themselves not to think, and this in itself means the ruin of a human being, and simply accepted that this was the way it had to be, and that the person who gave them their orders was always right. But didn't the Nazis too, it comes to mind, argue the same way? Or else was a matter of the progressive doctrine. granite ideology, an interrogator, an awful Orotican sent there to the Colima in 1938 as a penalty assignment, was so touched when M. Luria, former director of the Crevoy Rogue Industrial Complex, readily agreed to sign an indictment which meant a second camp term. He used the time they had thus saved to say, "You think we get any satisfaction from using persuasion? We have to do what the party demands of us. You are an old party member. Tell me, what would you do in my place?" Apparently, Luria nearly agreed with him, and it may have been the fact that he had already been thinking in such terms that led him to sign so readily. It is, after all, a convincing argument. But most often it was merely a matter of cynicism. The Bluecaps understood the workings of the meat grinder and loved it. In the Djida camps in 1944, interrogator Mironenko said to the condemned Babbage, with pride in its faultless logic, quote, "Interrogation and trials are merely judicial corroboration. They cannot alter your fate, which was previously decided. If it is necessary to shoot you, then you will be shot, even if you are altogether innocent. If it is necessary to acquit you, then no matter how guilty you are, you will be cleared and acquitted." Kushnarev, chief of the First Investigation Department of the West Kazakhstan Provincial State Security Administration, laid it on the line in just that way to Adolf Tsivilko. Quote, "After all, we're not going to let you out if you're a Leningrader," unquote. In other words, a Communist Party member with seniority. "Just give us the person and we'll create the case." That was what many of them said jokingly, and it was their slogan. What we think of as torture, they think of as good work. The wife of the interrogator, Nikolai Grabashenko, the Volga Canal Project, said touchingly to her neighbors, "Kolya is a very good worker." One of them didn't confess for a long time, and they gave him to Kolya. Kolya talked to him for one night, and he confessed. What prompted them all to slip into harness and pursue us so zealously, not truth but totals on the processed and condemned, because it was most comfortable for them not to be different from the others, and because these totals meant an easy life, supplementary pay, awards and decorations, promotions in rank, and the expansion of prosperity of the organs themselves. If they ran up high totals, they could loaf when they felt like it, or do poor work or go out and enjoy themselves at night. That is just what they did. Low totals led to their being kicked out, to their loss of their feedback, for Stalin could never be convinced that in any district or city or military unit he might suddenly cease to have enemies. That is why they felt no mercy, but instead an explosion of resentment and rage toward those maliciously stubborn prisoners who opposed being fitted into the totals, who would not capitulate to sleeplessness or the punishment cell or hunger. By refusing to confess, they menaced the interrogator's personal standing. It was as though they wanted to bring him down. In such circumstances, all measures were justified. If it's to be war, then war it will be. Ram the tube down your throat, swallow that salt water. Excluded excluded by the nature of their work and by deliberate choice from a higher sphere of human existence. The servitors of the Blue Institution lived in their lower sphere with all the greater intensity and avidity, and there they were processed and directed by the two strongest instincts of the lower sphere, other than hunger and sex, greed for power and greed for gain, particularly for power. In recent decades, it has turned out to be more important than money. Power is a poison well known for thousands of years. If only no one were ever to acquire material power over others, but to the human being who has faith in some force that holds dominion over all of us, and who is therefore conscious of its own limitations, power is not necessarily fatal. For those, however, who are unaware of any higher sphere, it is a deadly poison. For them there is no antidote. Remember what Tolstoy said about power. Ivan Ilyich had accepted an official position which gave him authority to destroy any person he wanted to. All without exception were in his hands, and anyone, even the most important, could be brought before him as an accused. And that is just where our blue boys are. There's nothing to add to the description. The consciousness of this power and the possibilities of using it mercifully. So Tolstoy quantifies the situation, but this does not in any way apply to our boys, constituted for Ivan Ilyich, the chief interest and attraction of the service. But attraction is not the right word. It is intoxication. After all, it is intoxicating. You are still young, still, shall we say parenthetically, a sniveling youth. Only a little while ago your parents were deeply concerned about you and didn't know where to turn to launch you in life. You were such a fool and you didn't even want to study, but you got through the 3 years at that school, and then how you took off and flew, how your situation changed, how your gestures changed, your glance, your turn of your head. The Learning Council of the Scientific Institute is in session. You enter, everyone notices you and trembles. You don't take the chairman's chair. Those headaches are for the rector to take on. You sit off to one side, but everyone understands that you are the head man there. You are the special department, and you can sit there for just 5 minutes and then leave. You have an advantage over the professors. You can be called away by more important business, but your eyebrows, or better still, your pursed lips. You purse your lips and say to the rector, you can't do that. There are special considerations involved. That's all, and it won't be done. Or else, you're an auspiced, a mere lieutenant. But the portly old colonel, the commander of the unit, stands up when you enter the room and tries to flatter you and play up to you. He doesn't even have a drink with his chief staff without inviting you to join them. The fact that you have only 2 tiny stars on your shoulder boards doesn't mean a thing. It's even amusing. After all, your stars have a very different weight and are measured on a totally different scale from those of ordinary officers. On special assignments, you are sometimes even authorized to wear major's insignia, for example, which is a sort of incognito, a convention. You have a power over all the people, and in that military unit, or factory or district, incomparably greater than that of the military commander, or factory director, or secretary of the district Communist Party. These men control people's military or official duties, wages, reputations, but you control people's freedom, and no one dares speak about you at all at meetings, and no one will ever dare write about you in the newspaper. Not only something bad, but something good. But anything good. They don't dare your name like that of a jealously guarded deity. Cannot be mentioned. Cannot even be mentioned. You are there. Everyone feels your presence. But it's as though you didn't exist. From the moment you don that heavenly blue service cap, you stand higher than the publicly acknowledged power. No one dares check up on what you do. But no one is exempt from your checking up on him. And therefore, in dealing with the ordinary so-called citizens, who for you are mere blocks of wood, it is altogether appropriate for you to wear an ambiguous and deeply thoughtful expression. For, of course, you are the one and no one else who knows about the special considerations, and therefore you are always right. There's just one thing that you must never forget. You, too, have been just such a poor block of wood. If you had not had the luck to become one of the little links in the organs, that flexible unitary organism inhabiting a nation as a tapeworm inhabits a human body. Everything is yours now. Everything is for you. Just be true to the organs. They will always stand up for you. They will help you swallow up anyone who bothers you. They will help move every obstacle from your path. But be true to the organs. Do everything they order you to. They will do the thinking for you in respect to your functions too. Today you serve in a special unit. Tomorrow you will serve in an interrogator's armchair. And then you will travel to Lake Selliger as a folklorist. Partly it may be to get your nerves straightened out. And then you may be sent from a city where you are too well known for the opposite end of the country as a plenipotentiary in charge of church affairs. Or perhaps you will become executive secretary at the Union of Soviet Writers. Be surprised at nothing. People's true appointments and true ranks are known only to the organs. The rest is merely play acting. Some honored artist or other, or hero of socialist agriculture is here today, and tomorrow he's gone. The duties of an interrogator will require work, of course. You have to come in during the day, at night, sit for hours and hours, but not split your skull over proof. Let the prisoner's head ache over that. And you don't have to worry whether the prisoner is guilty or not, but simply do what the organs require, and everything will be all right. It will be up to you to make the interrogation periods pass as pleasurably as possible, and not to get overly fatigued. And it would be nice to get some good out of it, at least to amuse yourself. You have been sitting a long time, and all of a sudden a new method of persuasion occurs to you. Eureka! So you call up your friends on the phone and you go around to the other offices and tell them about it with a laugh. Who shall we try on, boys? Who shall we try it on? It's really pretty monotonous to keep doing the same thing all the time. Those trembling hands, those imploring eyes, and that cowardly submissiveness, they are really a bore. If you could just get one of them to resist. I love strong opponents. It's fun to break their backs. It's such fun to break their backs, said the Leningrad interrogator, Ch.4 to GG. And if your opponent is so strong that he refuses to give in, and all your methods have failed, and you are in a rage, then don't control your fury. It's tremendously satisfying. That outburst. Let your anger have its way. Don't set any bounds to it. Don't hold yourself back. That's when interrogators spit in the open mouth of the accused and shove his face into the full cuspidor. That's the state in which they drag priests around by their long hair, or urinate on a kneeling prisoner's face. After such a storm of fury, you feel yourself a real honest-to-God man, or else you're interrogating a foreigner's girlfriend. So you curse her out, and then you say, "Come on now, does an American have a special kind of..." Is that it? Weren't there enough Russian ones for you? And all of a sudden you get an idea. Maybe she learned something from those foreigners. There's a chance not to be missed, like an assignment abroad. And so you begin to interrogate her energetically. How, what positions, more in detail, every scrap of information. You can use the information yourself, and you can tell the other boys too. The girl is blushing all over and in tears. It doesn't have anything to do with the case, she protests. Yes, it does. Speak up. That's power for you. She gives you the full details if you want. She'll draw a picture for you. If you want, she'll demonstrate with her body. She has no way out. In your hands, you hold the punishment cell of her prison term, and her prison term. If you have asked for a stenographer to take down the questions and answers, and they send in a pretty one, you can shove your paw down into her bosom right in front of the body being interrogated. The boy being interrogated is not a human being after all. There is no reason to feel shy in its presence. In fact, there's no reason for you to feel shy with anyone. And if you like the broads, and who doesn't, you'd be a fool not to make use of your position. Some will be drawn to you because of your power, and others will give in out of fear. So you've met a girl somewhere and she's caught your eye. She'll belong to you, never fear. She can't get away. Someone else's wife has caught your eye, she'll be yours too. Because after all, there's no problem about removing the husband. No, indeed. To know what it meant to be a blue cap, one has to experience it. Anything you saw was yours. Any apartment you looked at was yours. Any woman was yours. Any enemy was stripped from your path. The earth beneath your feet was yours. The heaven above you was yours. It was, after all, like your cap. Sky blue. The passion for gain was your universal passion. After all, in the absence of any checking up, such power was inevitably used for personal enrichment. And one would have to be holy to refrain. If we were able to discover the hidden motivation behind individual arrests, we would be astounded to find that, granted the rules governing arrests in general, 75% of the time, the particular choice of whom to arrest, the personal cast of the die, was determined by human greed and vengefulness. And of that 75%, half were the result of material self-interest on the part of the local NKVD, and of course the prosecutor too. From this point, I don't distinguish between them. How, for example, did Vlasov's 19-year-long journey through the archipelago begin? As the head of the district consumer cooperatives, he arranged a sale of textiles for the activists of the local party organization. These materials were of a sort and quality which no one nowadays would even touch. No one was bothered, of course, by the fact that the sale was not open to the general public, but the prosecutor's wife was unable to buy any. She wasn't there at the time. Prosecutor Rusov himself had been shy about approaching the counter, and Vlasov hadn't thought to say, "I'll set some aside for you." In fact, given his character, he would never have said this anyway. Furthermore, Prosecutor Rusov had invited a friend to dine in the restricted party dining room. Such restricted dining rooms used to exist in the 30s. This friend of his was not high enough in rank to be admitted there, and the dining room manager refused to serve him. The prosecutor demanded that Vlasov punish the manager, and Vlasov refused. Vlasov also managed to insult the district NKVD, and just as painfully, and he was therefore added to the rightist opposition. The motivations and actions of the Bluecaps are sometimes so petty that one can only be astounded. Security officer Sushenko took a map case and dispatched a case from an officer he'd arrested and started to use them right in his presence. And by manipulating the documentation, he took a pair of arm gloves from another prisoner. When the armies were advancing, the Bluecaps were especially irritated because they only got a second pick of the booty. The counterintelligence officer of the 49th Army who arrested me had a yen for my cigarette case, and it wasn't even a cigarette case, but a small German army bot of a tempting scarlet, however. And because of that piece of shit, he carried out a whole maneuver. As his first step, he omitted it from the list of belongings that were confiscated from me. You can keep it. He thereupon ordered me to be searched again, knowing all the time that it was all I had in my pockets. Aha, what's that? Take it away. And to prevent my protests, put him in the punishment cell. What Tsarist gendarme would have dared believe that way toward a defender of the fatherland? Every interrogator was given an allowance of a certain number of cigarettes to encourage those willing to confess and to reward stool pigeons. Some of them kept all the cigarettes for themselves. Even in accounting for hours spent in interrogating, they used to cheat. They got higher pay for night work, and we used to note way they wrote down more hours on the interrogations than they really spent. Interrogator Fyodorov, Shinty Station, P.O. Box number 235, stole a wristwatch while searching the apartment of a free person, Corsican. During the Leningrad blockade, interrogator Nikolai Fyodorovich Khrushchev told Elizaveta Viktorovna Strakovich, wife of the prisoner he was interrogating, K. Strakovich, "I want a quilt, bring it to me." When she replied, "All our warm things are in the room they've sealed," he went into her apartment and, without breaking the state security seal on the lock, unscrewed the entire doorknob. "That is how the NGB works," he explained gaily. And he went in and began to collect warm things, shoving some crystal in his pocket at the same time. She herself tried to get whatever she could out of the room, but he stopped her. "That's enough for you," he kept on raking in the booty. There's no end to such cases. One could issue 1,000 white papers, and beginning in 1918 too, one would need only to question systematically former prisoners and their wives. Maybe there are and were Bluecaps who never stole anything or appropriated anything for themselves, but I find it impossible to imagine one. I simply do not understand, given the Bluecaps' philosophy of life, what was there to restrain them. If they liked something, some particular thing. Way back at the beginning of the 30s, when all of us were marching around in German uniforms at the Red Youth Front and were building the first 5-year plan, they were spending their evenings in salons like the one in the apartment of Concordia, Yotzi, behaving like members of the nobility or Westerners. Their lady friends were showing off their foreign clothes. Where were they getting those clothes? Here are their family names, and one might almost think that they were hired because of those names. For example, in the Kamarova Provincial State Security Administration, there were a prosecutor named Trudnev Dron, a chief of the interrogation section, Major Shurkin, self-server, is Deputy Lieutenant Colonel Blandin Soupy and an interrogator, Skarovkatov's quick grabber. When all is said and done, one could not invent names more appropriate, and they were all right there together. I hardly bothered to mention again Volpilov, Wolfskin Stretcher, or Gravashenko, Plunderer. Are we to assume that nothing at all is expressed in family name, and such a concentration of them? Again, the prisoner's faulty memory. I, Kornayev, has forgotten the name of the Colonel of State Security, who is also Concordia's Yossi's friend. They both knew her, it turned out, who was in the Vladimir detention prison at the same time as Kornayev. This colonel was the living embodiment of the instincts for power and personal gain. At the beginning of 1945, during the height of the war booty period, he got himself assigned to that section of the organ headed by Abakumov himself, which was supposed to keep watch over the plundering. In other words, they tried to grab off as much as possible for themselves, not for the state, and succeeded brilliantly. Our hero pulled in whole freight carloads and built several dockhuts, one of them in Kling. After the war, he operated on such a scale that when he arrived in Novosibirsk station, he was ordered all the customs chased out of the station restaurant, and had girls and women rounded up and forced to dance naked on the tables to entertain him and his drinking companions. He would have gotten away with this too, but he violated another important rule. Like Khrushchev, he went against his own kind. Khrushchev deceived the organs, and this colonel did perhaps even worse. He laid bets on which wives he could seduce, and not just ordinary wives, the wives of his colleagues in the security police. He was not forgiven. He was sentenced to a political prison under Article 58, and was serving out his time fuming at their having dared to arrest him. Yet no doubt they would change their minds, and perhaps they did. That dread fate, to be thrown into prison themselves, is not such a rarity for the Bluecaps. There was no genuine insurance against it, but somehow these men were slow to sense the lessons of the past. Once again, this was probably due to their having no high powers of reason. Their low-grade intellect would tell them. It happens only rarely. Very few get caught. They may pass me by. My friends won't let me down. Friends, as a matter of fact, did try not to leave their friends in a bad spot. They had their own unspoken understanding, at least to arrange favorable conditions for friends. This was the case, for example, with Colonel Borovev in the Marfino Special Prison, and with the same V.I. Iine, who was in the Lubyanka for more than 8 years. Thanks to this cast spirit, those arrested singly as a result of only personal shortcomings usually did not do too badly. And that was how they were able to justify their sense of immunity from punishment in their day-to-day work in the service. But there were several known cases when camp security officers were tossed into ordinary camps to serve out their sentences. There were even instances when as prisoners they ran into Zeks, who had once been under their thumb and came off badly in the encounter. For example, security officer Linchin, who cherished a particularly violent hatred towards the 58s in camp, and had relied heavily on the support of the Blatnia, the habitual thieves, was driven right under the board bunks by those very same thieves. However, we have no way to learn more details about these cases in order to be able to explain them. What the escapists do, the state security officers who got caught in the wave were in very serious danger. They had their own waves. Excuse me. A wave is a natural catastrophe and is even more powerful than the organs themselves. In this situation, no one was going to help anyone to be else lest he be drawn into the same abyss himself. The possibility did exist, however, if you were well informed and had a sharp Czechist sensitivity of getting yourself out from under the avalanche, even at the last minute, by proving that you had no connection with it. Thus it was Captain Skianko, not the Kharkov Czech carpenter of 1918-19, who was famous for executing prisoners with his pistol, punching holes in bodies with his saber, breaking shin bones in two, flattening heads with weights, and branding people with hot irons, but perhaps a relative, was weak enough to marry, for love, an ex-employee of the Chinese Eastern Railroad named Koshinskaya, and suddenly found out, right at the beginning of the wave, that all the Chinese Eastern Railroad people were going to be arrested. This time, he was head of the Security Operations Department of the Archangel GPU. He acted without losing a moment. How? He arrested his own beloved wife, and not on the basis of her being one of the Chinese Eastern Railroad people, but on the basis of a case he himself cooked up. Not only did he save himself, but moved up and became chief of the Tomsk province NKVD. The waves were generated by the organ's hidden law of self-renewal, a small periodic ritual sacrifice so that the rest could take on the appearance of being purified. The organs had to change personnel faster than the normal rate of human growth and aging would ensure, driven by that same implacable urgency that forces a sturgeon to swim upriver and perish in the shallows, to be replaced by schools of small fry. A certain number of schools of Gabiski had to sacrifice themselves. This law was easily apparent to higher intelligence, but the Bluecaps themselves did what they did not want to accept the fact of its existence and make provision for it. Yet the hour appointed in their stars, the kings of the organs, the aces of the organs, and the ministers themselves laid their heads down beneath their own guillotine. Yakuta took one such school of fish along with him. No doubt many of whose glorious names we shall come to admire when we come to the White Sea Canal, were taken in this school, and their names thenceforth expunged from poetic eulogies. Oh, I really can't wait to read what the White Sea Canal is. So fascinating. Very shortly, a second school accompanied the short-lived Yerjov. Some of the finest cavaliers of 1937 vanished in this way. Yet will not to exaggerate their number. It did not by any means include all the best. Yerjov himself was beaten during his interrogation. He was pitiful. Gulag was orphaned during his wave of arrests. For example, arrested with Yerjov were the chief of the financial administration of Gulag, the chief of the medical administration of Gulag, the chief of the guard service of Gulag, and even the chief of the security operations department of Gulag, who oversaw the work with the camp godfathers. And later there was a school of Beria. The corpulent, conceited Abakumov had fallen earlier, separately. Someday, if the archives are not destroyed, the historians of the organs will count all this step by step. with all the figures and all the glittering names. Therefore I am going to write only briefly about Iine and Abakimov, a story I've learned only by chance. I will not repeat what I've already written about them in the first circle. It's another book of his. Associated. Iine had been raised to the heights by Abakimov and was very close to him. At the end of 1952, he came to Abakimov with the sensational report that Professor Ettinger, a physician, had confessed to intentional malpractice while treating Zhdanov and Sherbakov with the purpose of killing them. Abakimov refused to believe him. He knew the whole cookery and decided Iine was getting too big for his britches. But Iine had a better idea of what Stalin wanted. To verify the story, they managed to cross-question Ettinger that very evening, but each of them drew different conclusions from its testimony. Abakimov concluded that there was no such thing as a doctor's case, and Iine concluded that there was. A second attempt at verification was to take place the following morning, but thanks to the miraculous attributes of the nighttime institution, Ettinger died. That very night, in the morning, Iine, bypassing Abakimov, and without his knowledge, telephoned the Central Committee and asked for an appointment with Stalin. My own opinion, however, is that this was not his most decisive step. Iine's decisive action, following which in his life hung in the balance, was in not going along with Abakimov earlier, and perhaps in having Ettinger killed that same night. Who knows the secrets of those courtyards? Had Iine's contact with Stalin begun earlier, perhaps? Stalin received Iine, set in motion the doctor's case, and arrested Abakimov. From that point on, it would seem that Iine conducted the doctor's case independently of, and even despite Beria. There were signs before Stalin's death that Beria was in danger, and perhaps it was he who arranged to have Stalin done away with. One of the first acts of the new government was to dismiss the doctor's case. At that time, Iine was arrested while Beria was still in power, but Abakimov was not released. At the Lubyanka, a new order of things was introduced, and for the first time in its entire existence, a prosecutor crossed its threshold. Terekov, imprisoned Iine, was fidgety and subservient. I am not guilty. I am here for no reason. He asked to be interrogated. As was his custom, he was sucking a hard candy at the time, and when Terekov rebuked him for it, he spat it out in the palm of his hand. Pardon me. As we have already reported, Abakimov roared with laughter. Hocus pocus. Terekov showed him the document authorizing him to inspect the internal prison of the Ministry of State Security. Abakimov brushed it away. You can forge 500 of those. As an organizational patriot, he was principally offended not by being in prison, but by his encroachment on the power of the organs, which could not be subordinate to anything in the world. In July 1953, Iine was tried in Moscow and shot, and Abakimov remained in prison. During one interrogation, he said to Terekov, "Your eyes are too beautiful. I'm going to be sorry to have to shoot you. Leave my case alone. Leave it while you still have time." On another occasion, Terekov called him in and handed him a newspaper which carried the announcement of Beria's exposure. At the time, this was virtually a cosmic upheaval. Abakimov read it and, With not so much as the twitch of an eyebrow, he turned the page and started to read the sports news. On another occasion, during an interrogation in the presence of a high-ranking Gabist, who had in the recent past been his subordinate, Abakimov asked him, how could you have permitted the investigation of Beria case to be conducted by the prosecutor's office instead of the MGP? Everything in his own domain kept nagging him. He went on, do you really believe they are going to put me, the Minister of State Security, on trial? The answer was yes, and he replied, and put on your top hat, the organs are finished. He was, of course, too pessimistic, uneducated courier that he was. But when he was in the Lubyanka, Abakimov was not afraid of being tried. He was afraid of being poisoned. This too showed what a worthy son of the organs he was. He started to reject the prison food altogether and would eat only eggs that he bought from the prison store. In this case, he simply lacked technical imagination. He thought one couldn't poison eggs. The only books he borrowed from the well-stocked Lubyanka library were the works, believe it or not, of Stalin, who had imprisoned him. But in all likelihood, this was for show rather than the result of any calculation that Stalin's adherents would gain power. He spent 2 years in prison. Why didn't they release him? The question is not a naive one. In terms of his crimes against humanity, he was over his head in blood. But he was not the only one, and all the others came out of it safe and sound. There is some hidden secret here too. There is a vague rumor that in his time, he had personally beaten Khrushchev's daughter-in-law, Lyuba Sedk, the wife of Khrushchev's older son, who had been condemned to a punishment battalion in Stalin's time and who died as a result. And so it goes. And so goes the rumor. This is why, having been imprisoned by Stalin, he was tried in Leningrad under Khrushchev and shot on December 18, 1954. But Abakimov had no real reason to be depressed. The organs still didn't perish because of that. Thank you for listening. I just wanted to say hi to the nice gentleman I was talking to on the internet who left me a comment, a real nice comment saying Merry Christmas. I can't remember your name, but I just wanted to say thank you and have a good day.